الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. It's important for us to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessings that He has bestowed upon us. One of the most difficult things for the human being, and it's not something that comes naturally, it's something that the human being has to learn. It's a learned trait, and that is the trait of gratitude. Gratitude is unnatural to the human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the human being, He says, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَظَلُومٌ كَفَّارٌ. He says in Surah Ibrahim, which translates to, and if you were to attempt to enumerate the blessings of your Lord, you would be unable to do so. Indeed, the human being is transgressing. He is ever transgressive, and the human being is ever ungrateful. This is the nature of the human being. Whenever you see in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word insan, it's either because the context is speaking about the origins of the human being as a natural form in this world, or there is some kind of dispraise that is involved. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the term insan and speaks to the human being, oftentimes with phrases like, "O human being, O mankind," usually this is either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking about the origins of the human being, or there is some kind of dispraise. Now that's different than Ibn Adam. Whenever you see in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the human being or addresses us as children of Adam, son of Adam, there is some kind of praise involved in that, because we're being attributed and we're being ascribed to Adam alayhi salam. And Adam alayhi salam is beyond a mere human being in his original nature. Adam alayhi salam was an obedient servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when the term Ibn Adam is used, it is calling back to Adam alayhi salam and his servitude to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Mulk, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ. He describes himself in the second verse, in the opening verses of Surah Al-Mulk, as the one who has created death and life in order to test you all. And oftentimes, we look at things like death and illness, etc., things like that, things that we don't like. We look at them as being unnatural. We look at them as being wrong. We look at them as being something had to have gone wrong. Some mistake had to have been made in order for these things to happen. And that is very incorrect. Death and illness, they are the most natural things in the whole world. There are few things that could be arguably more natural than dying. It is as sure as life. As soon as a person is born, they come predisposed for death. This is the most natural thing. And this shows the difference between the Muslimin and their mindset and the Mushrikeen and Kuffar and their mindset. The Kuffar, when someone dies or gets sick, we have to blame someone. There has to be someone to blame. When someone dies, someone made a mistake, as if we were designed to live for eternity. Actually, that is the most natural thing in the world for the person to die. And if we understand this, we will not be surprised by death. We have to understand that we were created to die. We were built to die. That is part of our existence. That is part of concluding our full circle of life, is to die. That's part of the things that Allah instilled in us and created us for. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes himself saying, the one who created death and life in order to test you all. We were created for that. We were created for death. We were created for life. And everyone has a predetermined time to live. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ أَجَلٍ. And for every people, there is an appointed time of expiration. فَإِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهُمْ لَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ سَاعَةً وَلَا يَسْتَقْدِمُونَ. And when a people's time of expiration comes, they will not be taken a moment before nor a moment after that appointed time. Exactly according to the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we understand this, we understand that anything beyond that is a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we understand that we were created in this world to be tested, any comfort we are given is a blessing of Allah. If we understand that we were not created to be in luxury and comfort, our skin was not created to be comfortable all the time, our minds were not created to be comfortable all the time. If we understand this, and we are no longer surprised by death, by illness, by discomfort, by hardship, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. Indeed, we have created the human being into difficulty and hardship. He described our existence on this earth as hardship and difficulty in Surah Al-Balad. That's what he described it as. That means that moments of when we are stress-free and happy and comfortable and everything's going right, that is the exception. That is not the norm. And when a person is ungrateful, it is because their expectations were not tempered to reality. They were expecting something that no one ever promised them. Or they were expecting something that was promised to them by someone that does not have the right to make that promise, like a shaitan. A shaitan promises, but he doesn't have the right to make those promises, nor does he have the ability to fulfill them. When we believe him, we become disappointed when those promises do not come to fruition. However, we should be disappointed in ourselves. And so, if we understand this, we now accept death as a natural part of our existence. Now it's no longer a matter of, I hope it doesn't happen. It's a matter of, when it happens, this will be the situation. When it happens, I want to be ready. When it occurs, not if, not maybe, no, when it happens. The Prophet ﷺ told the companions to pray the prayer of a person who is departing. Because eventually, one day, you are going to see the last sunrise. Most of us will not even know. And one day, you're going to drink your last glass of water. And one day, you're going to smile for the last time. And one day, you and I are going to see our last sunset. And one day, we are going to take our last and final breath. And it is only the fool who is surprised by that. That is only a fool should be surprised by that. And that is why if you look into the biographies of the companions, radiallahu anhum, not one of them was surprised by his death. Never. Who's not surprised? Because they understood. الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised death just as He promised life subhanahu wa ta'ala. He created death just as He created life. And so it is the most natural thing in the world. And so it becomes an issue of, I need to plan for this thing. And if we can do that, we now will have something called gratitude. Now, anything beyond that, we are grateful. Anything beyond that is an exception. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed, we have created the humankind into difficulty. Any ease that comes, we understand that that is beyond what we should expect. And there's a narration that An-Nawawi rahimahullah mentions in Riyadh al-Salihin. It's a narration collected by Abu Dawood in his Sunan on the authority of Uthman ibn Affan. It's narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and listen and try to contemplate really the meanings of this narration. He said, لَيْسَ لِبْنِ آدَمَ حَقٌّ فِي سِوَى هَذِهِ الْخِصَالِ. He says the human being has no right to beyond the following things. The human being has no right to expect beyond the following. قال بيت يسكنه, a dwelling to live in, وثوب يواري عورته, and a garment to cover his private parts, وجلف الخبز والماء, and dry bread and water. That is what we should expect. That's what the human being has a right to. Anything above that or beyond that is gratuitous from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because anything beyond that is truly unnatural. It is truly a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Listen to that narration. Whenever you go to complain in your mind, whenever I complain, whenever you feel depressed, whenever you feel unfulfilled, whenever you feel like people are not doing what they should be or not giving you what you feel you're owed, or you feel like your life isn't turning out the way it should have or the way that you planned, or you feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is overlooking your circumstances, just remember, the human being has no right to expect beyond a dwelling to conceal him, a garment to cover his privates, dry bread and water. And what's amazing about that is that the kid, the child, the adult who is living somewhere in a little tiny village that is the furthest thing from luxury, right? And they get something that they're in the forest or they're in the woods and they catch some little animal and they're bringing it home and they're very excited because usually they don't eat meat, right? That feeling that vagrant or that poor person has is the same exact feeling and chemical reaction that the guy at the top of the tower or flying 30,000 feet in the air in the most first-class, luxurious veal, when he tastes it and places it on his tongue, it is the exact same feeling. It has nothing to do with actually something that is outside of you. It is all an internal thing. It is exactly the same. There is no difference. So when a person fights and struggles and toils for that which is beyond, and stresses himself and pulls himself apart for that which is beyond, he is pulling himself apart because of a fantasy that exists in his mind. There's no difference. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us gratitude. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us what will be of consequence to us and to guide us with that which He has taught us. Wallahu a'lam. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.